Today, we follow the money and the approvals. Canada capped student visas, tightened foreign worker rules, yet some nationalities keep getting through in record numbers while Canadians struggle to find work. What happened inside IRCC? Who benefits and who's paying the price? Let's pull the file. Chapter 1. Canada's 2025 Reality Check. Canada began 2025 under pressure. Inflation cooled to 2.6%, but consumer debt stayed above $2.4 trillion, and the Bank of Canada's 5% policy rate still squeezed mortgages. Unemployment crept to 6.9%, the highest since 2021. The promise of strong growth felt like a press release myth. Behind the averages were anxious families. Grocery prices were up 19% over 2020 levels. Housing costs consumed over 50% of income for renters in Toronto and Vancouver. Statistics Canada confirmed youth joblessness above 12%, a generation clutching resumes and waiting lists. Businesses once eager to hire pulled back. The S&P Global Canada PMI slumped to 46.3 in September, below the 50 line that marks contraction. Restaurants cut shifts, logistics firms delayed routes, tech startups froze hires. For many Canadians, open positions meant unpaid internships, yet immigration remained historically high. More than 471,000 permanent residents in 2023, on track for 500,000 plus targets through 2025. It was the world's boldest intake relative to population, a move celebrated abroad but questioned at home. Ottawa's argument: newcomers fill shortages and sustain growth. But in 2025's slow economy, shortages weren't everywhere. They were sector-specific. Skilled trades, healthcare and agriculture still needed hands. Retail and clerical fields were overcrowded. The same policies that fixed one problem deepened another. Canadians began noticing mismatches. A mechanic in Sudbury saw foreign hires in restaurants while job fairs for construction sat half empty. A graduate in Edmonton worked part-time under an employer who held 3 temporary foreign worker permits. Who are these permits really helping became a national question. And in the center of it all stood IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, processing millions of applications, issuing approvals faster than ever, and increasingly accused of losing sight of its own balance sheet of fairness. Chapter 2. The caps that didn't cap. After years of uncontrolled growth in international students, IRCC announced a 2-year cap in 2024, a target of about 360,000 study permit approvals, roughly 35% below 2023. On paper, it was reform. In practice, the system still processed over 600,000 applications, and extensions kept the numbers high. Provinces like Ontario and British Columbia absorbed most students, fueling housing shortages. In Brampton alone, an estimated 65,000 international students competed for 10,000 licensed rental units. Landlords sliced basements into shared rooms, while Canadians in the same market were priced out overnight. The cap excluded renewals and transfers. A student could switch programs, reapply, or move to a private college and still keep status. Add the postgraduate work permit, PGWP, pathway, and tens of thousands remained work eligible each year. The intake slowed slightly. The population did not. IRCC defended the policy as dynamic management. But for employers, that meant constant access to fresh temporary labor. For Canadian graduates, it meant crowded job boards and lower starting wages. Retail managers admitted off record that over half their hires were international students working beyond 20 hours. Meanwhile, tuition dollars kept flowing. International students paid 5 times the domestic rate, bringing in over $22 billion annually. Colleges became dependent on foreign fees, turning education into Canada's 4th largest export. For some institutions, capping admissions felt like economic suicide, so they found loopholes. By 2025, the federal auditor flagged integrity risks. Agents abroad falsified letters of acceptance, private colleges operated without student housing, and consultants charged families life savings for uncertain promises. Yet approvals kept coming, because rejecting applications slowed targets and raised political questions. So when Ottawa claimed to be tightening the tap, the numbers told another story. Canada still hosted over 900,000 international students, the highest per capita rate in the world. The cap sounded decisive, but acted like a sieve, and every approval letter echoed inside a Canadian household that felt invisible. Chapter 3. India by the numbers. Policy, not people. For years, India has been Canada's single largest source of newcomers across almost every IRCC stream. In 2024, Indian nationals made up 27% of permanent resident landings, 45% of international students, and roughly 1/5 of temporary foreign worker permits. No other country even comes close. The volume itself isn't the issue, the concentration is. By late 2025, projections show about 148,000 Indian-born permanent residents added to Canada's total, up despite political friction between Ottawa and New Delhi. Even after the diplomatic chill of 2023, the flow never stopped because both sides needed each other. Canada needs skilled migrants. India needs opportunity pipelines for its graduates. But scale without symmetry creates strain. When one country dominates the queue, fairness questions arise. Smaller source nations, from Nigeria to the Philippines, complain of slower processing, while Canadians see headlines of record approvals. Inside IRCC, officials quietly admit that the system is built for throughput, not balance. The data trail confirms it. Study permit approvals for Indian students dipped only 7% under the 2024 cap, far less than expected. Meanwhile, applications from Africa fell over 30% because colleges prioritized the markets that paid fastest. It's an algorithmic bias disguised as efficiency. Employers in tech and logistics favor applicants with Canadian education experience, many of them Indian grads already holding PGWPs. That's rational business, but it means homegrown diploma holders face longer job hunts. A Toronto recruiter recently said, "The resumes look the same, but work permit holders can start tomorrow." Critics inside Parliament call it policy inertia. Every stakeholder, colleges, consultants, landlords and employers, profits from the inflow, so there's little incentive to slow down. The losers are Canadian students, taxpayers funding infrastructure, and newcomers themselves who arrive into an overcrowded system. The result is a paradox. A program meant to strengthen diversity ends up over-reliant on one nation. Not because Indians did anything wrong, but because Canada never built guardrails against volume. The numbers aren't racist, they're revealing. They show how convenience quietly replaced strategy at IRCC's core. Chapter 4. The Low-Wage Shake-Up. TFWP Reality. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program, TFWP, was supposed to be Canada's emergency valve for labour shortages. During the pandemic, Ottawa raised employer caps to keep food and logistics moving. By 2023, that temporary flexibility became a habit many companies didn't want to quit. In 2024 and 2025, the federal government began reversing course. The share of low-wage TFWs per workplace dropped from 20% to 10%, and some regions capped at just 1 or 2 per employer. The change hit food service, cleaning and hospitality hardest. Employers called it economic shock therapy. Employment and Social Development Canada reported a 50% decline in new low-wage TFWP positions by mid-2025. Yet the labour market hardly eased because hundreds of thousands already inside Canada on open or PGWP permits remained work eligible. Caps slowed inflow but didn't shrink the pool. For Canadian job seekers, the picture is confusing. Job boards list openings, but many are reserved for employer-specific LMIA positions already matched to a worker abroad. To the average Canadian, it feels like shadow hiring, jobs that appear public but are effectively pre-filled. Meanwhile, some employers gamed the system, rotating TFWs every 2 years to avoid conversion costs, paying below regional averages, and offering substandard housing. Ottawa's new inspection blitz in 2025 uncovered hundreds of violations and over $2 million in fines. But critics say penalties are cheaper than compliance. The human side is harder to quantify. Many temporary workers, Filipino caregivers, Indian cooks, Caribbean farmhands, become de facto essential Canadians, paying taxes but excluded from citizenship for years. When policies swing back and forth, both they and local workers lose stability. By summer 2025, the government pledged a redesign linking work permit issuance directly to verified shortage lists, region by region. It's a smart step, but late. The public has already decided the system is broken, and for Canadians watching rent rise and hours fall, redesign sounds like bureaucracy, not rescue. Chapter 5. Are Canadians losing jobs? The question echoes through coffee shops and comment sections across the country. Are Canadians actually losing jobs to newcomers? The honest answer, drawn from 2025 data, is complicated. Statistics Canada's July 2025 labour force survey reported employment down 41,000 positions and unemployment at 6.9%, up from 5.8% a year earlier. Youth unemployment hit 12%. Those numbers reflect a cooling economy, but they also magnify frustration with immigration volumes that remain historically high. Beneath the averages are stories of stagnation. A 27-year-old graduate in Calgary with a business diploma applies for 40 retail roles and receives 1 interview. The store finally hires 2 part-time workers on student visas who can legally work extra hours under temporary rules. No one broke the law, but the optics are brutal for citizens told labor shortages justify more inflow. Analysts point to structural overlap. Roughly 1.1 million temporary residents now hold legal work eligibility. Students, postgrads, TFWPs, and asylum claimants combined. Many compete in low to mid-wage bands under $25 per hour, the same segment Canadians rely on for entry jobs. In big cities, that concentration flattens wages. Average hourly earnings grew only 1.7% over the year, below inflation. Employers defend the trend as flexibility. They can fill shifts quickly without the long-term obligations that come with permanent staff. But for Canadians, flexibility looks like insecurity. Part-time employment sits near 19% of total jobs, the highest in a decade. Workers stack 2 or 3 gigs just to keep up with rent. Economists clarify that newcomers don't steal jobs. Demand and policy design do. Still, policy created a perception problem. When Ottawa lifts targets but housing, transit and training lag behind, competition becomes visible at the ground level. For a struggling Canadian family, nuance doesn't pay the bills, outcomes do. The summer of 2025 saw the first major demonstrations in Hamilton and Edmonton under the banner Jobs for Canadians First. Protesters demanded audits of IRCC approval data, claiming bias toward markets like India and the Philippines, while domestic workers languish. Government spokespeople called the rhetoric divisive. Protesters called it truth. The reality sits between outrage and apathy. An overloaded system rewarding speed over fairness. Canadians aren't angry at immigrants. They're angry at a bureaucracy that treats them as afterthoughts in their own labour market. Until transparency improves, suspicion will fill the silence. Chapter 6. Colleges compliance and the 47,000. Question: when IRCC testified before Parliament in 2025, one number stunned even seasoned reporters. 47,000 international students were flagged non-compliant with their study conditions. Some dropped out, others worked full-time without authorization. Many were victims of fraudulent agents. The revelation confirmed what Canadians suspected: oversight failed. The root problem is structural. Education, once a public service, morphed into a $22 billion export industry. Provincial colleges rely on foreign tuition for up to 60% of revenue. To keep lights on, they outsource recruitment overseas to private agents chasing commission, not quality. The result: letters of acceptance issued faster than dorms or classrooms could handle them. Housing exposes the human toll. In Brampton, a single detached home hosts 8 students paying $500 each per month. In Surrey, garage conversions rent for $900 a bed. Municipal inspectors can't keep up. Canadians blame newcomers, but the real culprits are policy gaps that allowed education to become real estate speculation in disguise. The cap introduced in 2024 was supposed to reset balance, 360,000 study permit approvals nationwide. Yet because renewals and program switches remain exempt, total valid study permits still hover near 900,000. Colleges quietly shift applicants between campuses to stay under provincial quotas, a legal loophole Ottawa struggles to close. Enforcement teams are finally catching up. In spring 2025, IRCC began joint audits with the Canada Border Services Agency targeting fake admission letters. Over 1,000 removal orders were issued for fraudulent files, but most students were victims, not criminals. Public sympathy rose for those scammed by the very system Canada touted as transparent. Provinces are now required to verify good standing status for every DLI, designated learning institution, before IRCC issues new allocations. Ontario's Education Ministry has already suspended 5 private colleges and restricted 10 more pending investigation. For the first time in years, accountability has entered the vocabulary. But cleanup has costs. Each closure displaces hundreds of students and millions in lost tuition. Local economies that thrived on rentals and part-time labor feel the shock. The same communities demanding reform now face the fallout of dependency. Canada's education-immigration complex, once seen as a win-win, has become a cautionary tale of unchecked growth. Chapter 7. Approvals versus outcomes. The debate raging across Canada is no longer about how many people are arriving. It's about what outcomes those approvals deliver. By mid-2025, IRCC had issued over 1.6 million temporary permits of various types: work, study and visitor. Permanent resident landings remain on pace for roughly 500,000 this year. The numbers prove IRCC's efficiency. The results expose its imbalance. Skilled worker and express entry streams still perform well. Yet the largest growth sits in open work and postgraduate permits, pathways with little labor market targeting. Roughly 700,000 holders can take any job in any field, anywhere. Economists warn that open permit saturation is flooding low-wage markets, while genuine skill shortages in trades and healthcare remain half-filled. In an effort to rebalance, Ottawa added new selection rounds for French-speaking candidates and priority occupations. A July 2025 express entry draw invited 6,300 francophones, a record. It's a step toward diversity, but also an admission that the system lost direction. For years, Canada chased quantity. Now it's scrambling for fit. Meanwhile, processing bias toward large sending countries persists because digital systems favor predictable documentation formats and bulk agreements with colleges. Smaller nations with weaker digital records wait longer. That imbalance fuels resentment abroad and frustration at home. Fairness has become a geography problem. Provinces are pleading for control. Quebec already caps its own streams. Atlantic Canada now experiments with regional quota swaps to ensure newcomers match local demand. Manitoba proposes linking PR targets directly to employer wage commitments, an idea gaining traction federally. The message is clear: approvals must serve the economy, not the other way around. For Indian and Filipino applicants, the two biggest groups, the challenge isn't acceptance anymore, it's integration. Many arrive credential-rich but job-locked below their skill level. Canada measures success in landings, not livelihoods. Until that metric changes, every record year will hide a record waste of human potential. The truth few officials say aloud: volume has replaced vision. Approvals became performance metrics. The IRCC's internal dashboards light up green when targets are hit, even if outcomes are grey. It's a bureaucratic victory and a social failure, one Canadians and newcomers now share. Chapter 8: Fixing the Balance Without the Backlash. The fix begins with transparency. Publish every quarter by province, wage band and occupation who gets approved and why. Canadians deserve to see their system's pulse. Right now, data arrives months late and buried in PDFs. Without clarity, rumor becomes policy. Next comes targeting. Relink the temporary foreign worker program to verified labor shortage lists, not employer lobbying. In 2025, Ottawa pledged this change, but implementation lags. Done right, it means trades, nursing and agriculture get the permits, not retail or rideshare. Education reform is equally urgent. Tie every study permit allocation to housing capacity and employment outcomes. Reward institutions whose graduates secure skilled work. Penalize those that treat students as revenue streams. The provinces must publish compliance scores so families abroad know which schools are credible. Enforcement has to carry teeth. Fine employers who underpay foreign hires. Suspend recruiters who forge documents and audit the agencies profiting from chaos. Canada's brand depends on integrity. Without it, welcoming nation becomes marketing, not morality. Policymakers must also address Canadians directly. Immigration isn't a blame game, it's a planning game. When housing, wages and training scale with arrivals, resentment fades. When they don't, anger finds targets. Communication is the difference between inclusion and backlash. Long-term, IRCC needs to move from volume to value, measuring success by retention, regional spread and wage growth. Approving fewer, better-matched candidates would serve both sides of the border. A smaller system that works beats a bigger one that breaks. Canada's strength has always been balance, openness with order, compassion with competence. The world still admires that equation. Whether IRCC can restore it depends on one question. Will Ottawa choose transparency over optics? The country's social contract may hinge on the answer. If this made you proud to be Canadian, or made you curious about what Canada's doing right, hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more stories about the Great North. Because the world is watching, and quietly, so is America.